Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Aller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Hello, listeners. Thanks for joining us on another edition of the Buckeye Extra Football Podcast. We have all three of us here today. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Bill Rabinowitz, Rob Aller, reflecting on Ohio State's 45-0 shutout win over Purdue on Saturday. And it really wasn't close. It was a blowout. And I think overall for Ohio State, a good response after a emotional win at Penn State. And we've seen them kind of go through the motions before after the Nittany Lions games. And I thought they put a good foot forward and took care of business.
Yeah, you had mentioned that. I obviously I covered the team. I remembered it, but I didn't until you mentioned it. I went back and looked it up. But yeah, almost every year after they played Penn State, most notably in 2017 when they went to Iowa and got just crushed. But even the ones they've won afterward, it's been a struggle. And it wasn't a struggle in Purdue. Some of that's Purdue. Look, they're not good. I mean, they're just not good. So part of it was Purdue being so inept. But Ohio State looked pretty good in all three phases. There was nothing. There were no red flags, no yellow flags. The biggest scare they got all game, honestly, was when Carson Hinsman went down. It looked like it might be a serious injury, and then Donovan Jackson at one point was kind of like holding his ankle, and you thought, oh God, if you lose those two, they're in real trouble. But those guys came back and played. I thought it was another step forward for the line. The defense for a shutout since 2017 against Rutgers in Big Ten play. Obviously, it helps when the other team misses chip shot field goals. But, yeah, just a solid performance. And that's what a mature team does in a game like this.
They did what they had to do. I mean, Purdue's awful, essentially. And it was 45-zip. Turn the page. No one got really seriously injured. Hinsman, that was a scare, as Bill said. But they came out of it. I'm still a little surprised that they're playing their starters, into the fourth quarter, the start of the fourth quarter. But they want to give those guys reps. I think Ryan Day comes down on the side. He's always played his guys a little longer than I thought he should. But now with fewer plays, he wants them to max out on their plays, and that takes you to the fourth quarter. Now, of course, Will Howard goes down when he should be out of the game, then it's all hell to pay for Ryan Day at that point. But it's all a roll of the dice.
Well, I think it should be noted, at least they kept the offensive line and Will Howard into the game into the fourth quarter, but they were rotating really early on the defensive side of the ball, because the second series Purdue had with the football, Ohio State almost had an entirely new front seven with Arvell Reese and C.J. Hicks as the linebackers. They had Mitchell Melton lined up as sort of a jack with a three-man front. So they were doing some stuff where they were bringing in the second team. Jermaine Matthews got a lot more reps at corner, so I thought they were more willing to rotate on defense, at least from the get-go. And it almost,
but isn't that the point though?
They score. It almost led that Purdue get on the scoreboard first. Luckily, Purdue has a kicker who can shank a 21-yard field goal.
You're kind of making my point, Joey, in that they rotated where they already have depth.
Well, they rotated in the spot that's more conducive to rotate. Like, you're not going to probably rotate your quarterback as much. And I think the offensive line is probably an entity unto itself, where you need to get those guys some runway to gel as a unit, because you have an entirely brand new left side that debuted at Penn State. This weekend in Northwestern, we'll preview the game later in the week, but I would think maybe you feel more confident in the left side and you don't need to carry them as deep into the game. But
well, I just remember, I mean, it works leaving guys in till it doesn't work, till there's an injury. We all remember Justin Fields getting hurt, late in the game. I don't even know who they were playing.
Penn State, and that was a closer game where
but it was still, I think they had it wrapped up. But anyhow, we're nitpicking. It's just your season can be lost if a guy goes down that you absolutely need. Again, I know that coaches and players are like, you can't really think about injuries. The moment you start worrying about injuries, you get injured. So I get that side of it. I just think that there's a balance there, and I'm not sure they've hit the sweet spot on it.
Only the first few plays of the fourth quarter. I mean, I think it was maybe 3 plays into the fourth quarter when they were finishing a drive. I think if they'd started a drive,
It's more what the score is. To me, they were up 45.
38. They're up 38. I mean, it doesn't matter. 38, 45 is no difference. But I think they just wanted to finish off the drive, and they got the ball to Emeka Egbuka, hadn't caught a pass all day, and that was the end of the starters. And it's worth noting that when the defensive front seven was when the starters were out in that Purdue, that's when Purdue actually moved the ball. So I'm not sure they have quite the depth they think they have. But you look at the players. I think Caden Curry is a starter level player. I mean, I think that's clear. He's a starter level player. That was interesting that they tried to get C.J. Hicks into the mix this week because he had been kind of a forgotten guy. I'm not sure how effective he was, but he was in. Mitchell Melton, I think, has flashed at times. He's that jack guy. I think he's a useful player for them. And and among the starters, look, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau showed up, flashed. Were more obviously impactful in this game. Not just the JT strip and the Sawyer scoop and score, but just in general. Just noticed those guys more than I had in previous games.
I do, Bill. You mentioned the depth of maybe the second team Ohio State defense. That was the time where Purdue went all the way down to the Ohio State 3-yard line, and I do want to give Purdue its proper due for blundering that whole sequence. They had the ball trailing 7-0 in the first quarter at a time when you are a 5-touchdown road underdog. You have a chance to tie the game in the first quarter at the Ohio State 3-yard line of 4th down, and you opt to go for a field goal. And mind you, we were talking to Nathan Baird in the press box. Ohio State fans probably remember him. He covered them. He covered the Buckeyes for Cleveland.com. He's now the Purdue beat writer at the Indy Star. But he was mentioning that the Northwestern game the previous week, Purdue opted not to kick a field goal from the right hash because this kicker couldn't make one from 40 yards. And so presumably the right hash from 21 yards, maybe he could do that, but he still missed it. So I thought that was maybe the football gods punishing for Purdue for its maybe lack of aggressiveness. And you have nothing to lose. You're a 5-touchdown road dog, and you try to settle for a field goal to make it 7-3. I mean, that's sort of a moot point. They missed both of their field goals, 21 and 38 yards. So that's a big reason why Ohio State got its first shutout of a Big Ten team since 2017.
Yeah, I always feel bad for Purdue because they were just so overmatched. I mean, they've got some good players. Their running back, Devin Mockabee, I think is a really good player. But it was just clear from the very start that they just had really nothing that could challenge Ohio State. And so you end up watching the game thinking, okay, does anyone get hurt? And that's one thing. And the other is, is there anything that crops up that makes you go, okay, that's a concern? And, the run game at times was spotty. I thought Travion Henderson ran really well. I mean, he's running like a man possessed. I mean, he runs hard. He's showing vision. He's breaking tackles. He had that 12-yard run he had. I think he broke like 3 tackles. I mean, it was just a very impressive performance. And he only had 6 carries. They got to get Quinshon Judkins on track. I think that's still something that they're waiting to do. Obviously Will Howard can run the ball. He's such a difference maker in the red zone because of his legs and his accurate passing, obviously. But that combination makes them that's why they're so successful in the red zone scoring touchdowns.
I think it's interesting how they've used the running backs now in back-to-back weeks. This was the second straight week Quinshon Judkins got the start, and it seems like they want him to be the primary workhorse kind of back and shoulder a lot of the carries, and that allows them to keep Travion fresh. And they were moving him around and doing different stuff. You mentioned the way he was able to run hard. He's getting the handoff, but there were a couple times he was out as a receiver. The touchdown right. He scored, he lined up out wide, and they motioned him and got the ball on a jet sweep, scores a touchdown. At the start of the fourth quarter, he lined up as out wide as a receiver, did a double move, and ended up going down the sidelines for a 32-yard reception. I mean, he has some pass catching ability. I think people forget. I think he had over 20 his freshman year. He had over 20 catches, so he is able to be a pass catcher and sort of a versatile guy. And they were putting him on the field at the same time as Quinshon, and I think that sort of bore fruit a little bit. with the way they're able to move stuff around, and kind of have my eye on that if Chip Kelly continues to do that with them during the stretch run, because he's involved 2 running backs, and I think Travion has enough of a skill set where they could kind of reposition him in different spots on the field. Certainly did that against Purdue, which was notable on Saturday.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room a little bit. Will Howard and the deep ball. We've been talking about that all season. He underthrew, was it Carnell? Yep. Carnell Tate, who dropped the ball, but he was 3 yards clear probably of the defender. If the ball was there, that's 6. I watched the Trevion. Joey just mentioned the deep ball to Trevion down the sideline. I think if that was thrown on the money, Trevion scores on that. Probably it would have been close. So that hasn't risen up and bitten them yet. But you get against the better teams. Of course, we don't know who the better teams are anymore. We can talk about that another point.
Yeah, we can.
Like who's good, but Will Howard. I thought in some ways it was his best game, sort of most complete game, but he still had a couple misses on the deep ball. And Joey and I were talking about this. Is it just a timing issue? Do they just need to work on it a little more? He seems to have the arm strength.
Right. Because I was asking you, Bob. I was asking you if you think does he need to release the ball sooner? Because at times it seems late, and that's why it's being underthrown.
Yeah, and maybe it has a little air under it. Too much air. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a QB, whisperer.
I think it's a really hard thing to simulate in practice. I think so much of that, the deep ball is like a little adrenaline, the defense, the win factor, whatever it might be. I just think it's, and some either have it or you don't. Look, C.J. Stroud was great at it, right? Dwayne Haskins was great at it. They just had a knack, and maybe some of it is that he's still a first-year guy here. He's got his full year. Jeremiah Smith's first year. I mean, I don't know.
He's throwing a better receiver. He's throwing a better receiver than he did at Kansas State. Like Ohio State's guys.
Of course, maybe that's the problem. They're too fast.
I think that's.
But it is a concern. I don't think we're piling on to say it's.
No, I think it is right.
It hasn't really improved much. Again, broken record. His best pass was, against what? Was it to Jeremiah Smith? And Smith kind of slowed down, but we've talked about that already. I just don't know how they get there, and maybe they don't need to. I mean, maybe they are good enough to go where they want to go without hitting the deep ball.
Yeah, I guess I want to get maybe let's just stay on this for another bit or so, but do you see it as a long-term concern with them where if Ohio State does not win the national championship this year, does not win the Big Ten, it's due to the fact that they couldn't hit on the deep ball? Because I don't necessarily...
I think it's contextual. It's like if in the title game...
Right.
He underthrows a guy and they lose the game, then it was an issue. It's one of those things you just wish, if you're Ohio State, you wish it was shored up a little bit. You'd wish you would connect on just a couple, just to say, okay, we've just had we don't know why it wasn't working, but now it's working. But until that point, it's not working.
Right. I mean, it does to me feel as if it's in the nitpick category. But on the other hand, I do think it's a potential concern for Ohio State where if you were in a playoff game against another top 5 opponent, there are going to be times where you feel like you can scheme something up and you have a receiver who breaks free open field. In those type of matchups, you're not going to get all those free shots all the time. Those are going to be more limited. So your percentage in those situations needs to be higher where you're not going to get 2, 3, 4 redos all the time necessarily. So when those open up, they need to be able to land those. But it doesn't feel as if he's that dramatically off from being able to hit on them.
I think he's got a good enough arm. I mean, I was thinking about J.T. Barrett, kind of joking about critics saying that he had a weenie arm. I think that was the phrase.
Arm is often the way they're derided.
And so I don't think that's the case. I think he can throw it. And the other thing is in the playoff and in Indianapolis, if they get there, these are controlled environments. You don't have wind, you don't have, the sun, you don't have any of those. It's just no excuses for not hitting it.
Ask Jerry Jones if you have sun indoors. I don't know if you saw that, but CeeDee Lamb complained about the sun in his eyes in a dome. Because it was coming through the window and he dropped a pass. Just had to throw that in there because the sun can be an element indoors.
Yeah. I mean, I asked Will Howard because, unlike Penn State, there were no turnovers, no fumbles, no interceptions. And it seemed to me like a pretty flawless performance. And he said, no, there are 5 or 6 plays I screwed up. And give Will Howard credit for this. He's an honest guy. I mean, you ask a question, he'll give you his candid, full answer. And he said, no, there were a lot of things I would like to have back. And I mean, I remember a couple of them. Obviously, deep ball is most glaring, but I think there were a couple of times he was a little bit high or a little bit late or whatever with throws, and that's going to happen. I mean, nobody's perfect. But
he slipped too on the turf.
He slipped on, and he said it was funny. He said, "I'm getting new cleats." So, I like I've said before, and I think we all agree, he has given them 90 to 95% of what they want at that position. The deep ball is the only thing. The occasional, locking onto receivers is still at times a thing. Although Rob, you pointed out the game there was a play in which he clearly looked off 2 receivers, I think, and made a nice throw for a first down, I think. So he gives you a lot. There's a lot to really like about Will Howard. I think if Ohio State fans are honest and were asked, has he been successful? Has he given you what you wanted from him? The answer would be yes.
And I think, too, when you see the glimpses of Devin Brown, and granted there aren't that many,
right,
you see the drop-off because when he had that first series with Ohio State, they had the ball on 3rd and 3. Brandon Inniss was on a drag route over the middle, just an easy underneath route to hit. The pass is high and a little late. And I think what makes Will Howard such a good quarterback for this team is he's so efficient in the intermediary throws, the short throws that keep them on schedule. And that's a big chunk of your diet as a quarterback. And that's what you're going to lean on much more so than the deep ball. And you want to be able to add that, but you got to keep stuff on schedule. And those throws where Devin Brown's going to be a little higher or late, that'd be the world you'd be living in without Will Howard behind center.
I think it's becoming an open question. If something were to happen to Will Howard, would Ryan Day turn to Julian Sayin instead of Devin Brown? We haven't asked that question. That question has not been asked of Ryan Day, and obviously Devin Brown has been the primary backup all year. But Joe, you're right. I mean, Devin Brown has not been leading the team down the field for touchdowns. That's the goal of the quarterback. I know they're a little bit limited. He's a backup. He's in there, and they don't want to, kind of rub it into the other team. But look, they're still supposed to be efficient and move the ball and score. And I had to look it up, but I don't remember that happening. Not very much, at least. Julian Sayin had a long scramble run up the middle for. I wonder. I'm not saying it is Sayin. I don't know that at all. I'm just saying I would not be shocked if again, God forbid something happens to Will Howard, and it's number 10 going in there.
And so,
I'm not saying,
but I'm not saying.
I think it's probably one thing if you had a Michigan State situation, again, where Will Howard gets knocked out for a series and gets evaluated. And I think Devin Brown comes into that. But if he's going to miss a game or two.
It's a Cardale situation, and you got to turn to somebody. And I don't know. I don't know.
I think Joey's right. I think it's Devin Brown, unless it's long term, and then you just open up the competition, and whether a guy can win the job in a 1 practice or 2 practices, then Sayin's got a shot. I think if it happened in Michigan, you bring Devin Brown in just for experience, I would think, but anything's possible with this bunch.
Yeah, I mostly brought that up.
It was 0 for 4 on Saturday, so I'm looking to stay 0 for 4.
Yeah, I mostly bring that up to just contrast Will Howard versus who the rest of the field would have been if he had not.
Well, exactly. That's why I say get him. That's why I said get him out of the game, because the drop off is extreme, and it's not like you've got another guy there that's going to take you to the promised land. So we can agree to disagree, and I'm sure Ryan Day's like,
He's not touching that question.
Go pound sand. Go pound sand. You know, we got to get them their reps and can't worry about injuries and all that. But of course, again, until an injury happens, and then it's like, you know, the abuse you bring upon yourself is pretty extreme.
I think we've talked about some of the offense stuff. On the defense side, we did see them incorporate the jack position a little more, and Tylee Williams' absence probably allowed them to do that a little more, to experiment with some different fronts. The fact that you were playing Purdue also allows you to do that. When Ryan Day was asked about the use of the jack there, which is the hybrid defensive end linebacker edge rusher role that Mitchell Bolton's played some, TJ Hicks some, he said that you don't always get a chance to experiment with that in games. Cough, you're playing Purdue. It was interesting to see them use that, but it wasn't really all that effective at times. I mean, you remember the one play where CJ Hicks came off the edge and got right in guard's face and then couldn't bring him down. Showed great burst and straight line speed to get there, but couldn't make the tackle. And I don't know if they did enough with that position where it's really going to be a big part of what they do moving forward. It was just sort of looked okay. I can't say it really produced all that much for them.
I'm going to throw this firecracker out there because an emailer got an email. What do you think Jim Knowles did not come out, and we don't have to belabor this. He didn't come out after the game and address the media. That's his prerogative. I don't know how that system works. Like if he just said he didn't want to, if he was asked, how that works. But what do you think Jim Knowles is what's his mindset right now from this standpoint? You had this defense. It was a really good defense. And now you've got the head coach using terms like re-engineering the defense, starting from scratch. Ryan Day's kind of going back and forth on that. One hand, he says, no, we're not. It's not like we're starting from scratch. And then Saturday after the game, he says, when you start from scratch. So not exactly sure where he is. But the Ryan Day, Jim Knowles relationship, I'd love to be a fly on the wall in those conversations because you are Jim Knowles. This is your defense. And it's sort of being, Nick Saban comes out and questions it, says it's antiquated, essentially.
Pass rush, the four-man pass rush.
Four-man pass rush. I just think that's an interesting dynamic that, you've got a lot of pride as a defensive coordinator, and suddenly terms like re-engineering are taking place.
Well, I think,
he just had to swallow his pride maybe a little bit on that.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, but I also think that he's now allowed to do a lot of the same stuff he was doing at Oklahoma State that made him successful. The Jack was part of that, kind of being more creative with things. I think he left Oklahoma State, comes to Ohio State, and all of a sudden the caliber of player is better. And he probably thinks, and Ryan Day says this, let's just let our guys play. I mean, we'll put them in positions to be successful, but our guys are better than their guys. Don't get cute. Got burned, obviously, in the 2022 game here against Michigan when he took some chances and got burned. So I think the thinking was, why take chances when we've got a prolific offense? Don't give teams easy touchdowns. That was kind of the shift. And then Oregon this year exposed it. And it's like, okay, we can't just play straight up against the best teams. They scored 32 points against Ohio State. Is that more than the rest of the schedules scored? I mean, close, right? I mean, the other 7 games, they haven't scored a lot more than that. And I think that Ryan Day said, okay, if we're going to win it all, and that's the goal, we've got to be a little bit more, a little less transparent. I mean, we've got to be more, fool some teams and disguise things a little more, which is what he did at Oklahoma State. So I think in some ways it's going back to his roots. But in terms of the pride thing, yeah, probably. I mean, he's never going to tell you one way or the other, but of course. I mean, the ideal thing is that you run your defense. It's great from beginning to end, and the head coach stays away. That didn't happen.
So they've allowed 9 offensive touchdowns this year. 4 were in the Oregon game. 5 were in the other games.
Okay. And how many?
Well, let's face it. That was a Denzel Burke. I mean, how many, the defense wasn't great against Oregon, but Denzel Burke was bad. And so if you take away that specific performance, I think we're looking at something different. But
but they never helped out Denzel Burke in that game. They never had a safety.
Right.
They did.
Situations.
He was left on an island even when the island was sinking.
Yeah, he was on island. He didn't get any help. He struggled, but he did struggle. I just find it interesting that, this defense has been pretty good statistically over the last couple of years. And then your head coach starts coming into your meetings and says, things need to change. I don't know.
But to credit the defense,
I find it an interesting situation.
You get a 1 touchdown since then. So it's worked.
So Ryan Day was right. That's what you're saying.
No, I mean, Ryan Day was right in saying that we can't just keep doing the same thing. We have to re-examine what we're doing and accentuate what we do and add some disguises, add some wrinkles. Yeah, just like Chip Kelly's done.
Here's what I don't get though. The players and Ryan Day are saying, "Oh, we need to simplify." So that goes against throwing wrinkles in and trying to do things. It's. I'm not saying it's a total mixed message. I'm just trying to. I don't think they're sharing. The devil's in the details. We don't exactly know what they've changed. They haven't revealed that. But this just put your hand in the ground and go and just play more aggressively. I think that's part of it. But there's some schematic stuff they're doing differently too. And yet they're saying, well, we need to simplify so we can play fast. So I just love to be in those meetings and hear really what's happening here.
I mean, they have done some different stuff. The 3-man rush with the jack was different against Purdue. They brought more pressure against Purdue than they had at any point all season. They blitzed on over 60% of the snaps or dropbacks per PFF. So they were doing some different stuff this week than they had done before. And those are some of the things that Knowles did at Oklahoma State a lot, where they had some 3-man fronts and they brought a lot of pressure. And as Bill said, they've seemed to be less reliant on that since Michigan in 22.
Yeah, I mean, they got burned so bad, and Knowles took so much heat for that, if you remember. Why don't you just let these guys play? And, so then he goes, he's got to be a little okay, I did that, and now they want me to go back to where I was and do it, so we'll see.
Yeah, and some of the words that they described are re-engineering and back to the basics. Some of it feels a little bit like semantics. To me, it almost feels like they're decluttering a little bit too, if you want to pick up another word to throw in there. But when they talk about paring it down, that seems to be what it is, and maybe accentuating some different stuff, and including trying to bring pressure in the right spots.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, these issues or problems, whatever you want to say about Ohio State, almost every team in the country would love to have these issues. I mean, there's you look at it around the country and, Georgia loses again. I mean, Georgia was preseason number 1. They've got major quarterback problems. I mean, they got blown out pretty much by Ole Miss. Miami, which had been on the high wire all year, fell off the high wire against Georgia Tech. Indiana, and then it's a big game coming up against Indiana in a couple weeks. Indiana looked like the world beaters they've been all year in the first half. I didn't get to see that part of it. I was still, at the Horseshoe, but I watched the second half, and it was like Indiana. Remember, they were Indiana and had to hold on for dear life. I mean, Michigan has no passing game essentially, and still almost won the game. So you look at all these other teams. I mean, Oregon's looking good, but Oregon even struggled a little bit with Maryland. I mean, not much, but it wasn't a dominating performance. I think Oregon and Ohio State are right now the 2 best teams in the country. I think Texas is certainly a threat. There's no question about that. But you look at other teams, and there's nobody that just scares you. And you go, Ohio State would have a lot of trouble. Would have less than a 50% chance against that team. I don't think you look at anybody and say that.
There's a handful: Tennessee, Alabama. I mean,
dangerous, sure. I mean, absolutely dangerous.
Yeah,
but not somebody go, oh my God, how did they beat them?
Well, I would say this. I don't think there's there's not a 2020 Alabama. There's not a 2019 LSU, and I include Ohio State in that. Ohio State's very good, but they are not like some incredible team that is so superior to everyone else that you don't have to worry about it.
Right. I agree with you. I mean, I think this is a very good Ohio State team, among the better. I mean, one of the better ones I've covered, but not the best. I mean, I still think the 19 team was the best team I covered. Obviously, 2014 team came together at the end. There have been several others that I thought were, really, really good. The Dwayne or the CJ Stroud teams, really good. This isn't one of the better ones, but it's not the best. But I think it could be. If they put it together and you look at the talent on that team, and if they clean up the little things, if the deep ball starts clicking, the defense keeps improving, you could very easily see this team winning a national championship.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think that's all. I agree with all that. And I think they have the coordinators to do it too. I think it was the way Chip Kelly's called games the last 2 weeks, the way they're figuring out different stuff to do with the running backs and just the creativity, making adjustments on the fly seems to bode well as things pick up here in November and December. But it's certainly a flawed field of contenders. It's a deeper field of contenders than I think maybe past years, where I don't think maybe playing the 10th team of the country is going to necessarily be an easy out. But the number 2, 3, 4, 5 teams don't all seem so insurmountable.
You look at the 3 and 4 seeds. The ACC and the Big 12. They're going to have the 3rd and 4th seeds, and they're very beatable. They're very beatable. I think the teams that are going to be really dangerous are the 5, 6, 7 seeds in the bracket, not so much the 3 and the 4. And the Big Ten, the loser of the Big Ten championship game, is probably going to be number 5. That's going to be interesting. 5 or 6.
Yeah,
right? Maybe 5 or 6.
I've seen some of the projections.
Have them 6.
Ohio State is 5 or 6. I do think we can talk about this later in the week too, but I think there's maybe too much ado about being the 5 seed, because I saw one projection today at Ohio State as the 5 seed playing Alabama as the 12.
Yeah, I saw that too. I was like, ugh.
I wouldn't want that.
No.
Everybody assumes the 12 seed is going to be a group of 5 school, but if Boise State is the 5th highest ranked conference champion as the number 10 seed, you're going to be playing Alabama or some other SEC team as a 12 seed, and that's not going to be a very fun out, even though that'd be a home game. But still,
yeah.
Could you imagine Ohio State Alabama as a first round playoff game on the 10th anniversary of 85 yards, the heart of the South?
That'd be fantastic. It'd be fantastic.
It'd be epic.
The writer's dream.
When's the last time Alabama played in potentially sub freezing weather?
You assume it's sub freezing here in December?
Potentially, or even in the 40s.
I don't know.
They don't play north of the Mason-Dixon very often.
No. Well, Kentucky would be the closest, right? If they ever played Kentucky late in the year.
Yeah. I think they played. Didn't they come north? Did they play Penn State or Michigan?
Wisconsin, but that was September.
Wisconsin.
Yeah, Madison in September is perfectly fine.
Yeah. All right.
We'll have more on the playoff rankings later in this week when the second batch are out Tuesday night, and we'll be back to preview Ohio State's trip to Wrigley Field on Saturday to visit the Northwestern Wildcats. Thanks for dropping by on this edition of the BuckeyeXtra Football Podcast to break down Ohio State's 45-0 win over Purdue. We'll be back later in the week. Thanks for listening.
Be sure and subscribe to the BuckeyeXtra Podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.